can you introduce yourself and describe your research media and communication localization around the Tokyo 2020 Paralympic broadcasting in Malawi?
My name is Jessie Agambadi. I am a PhD candidate at Loughborough University London campus. So my involvement in the research on localization as well as Paralympic broadcast in the 2020 Tokyo Paralympics started with my journey during my master's back in 2021, whereby my research mainly focused on trying to understand how Paralympic broadcast in Lulo communities can be perceived by Lulo Malawians. So I've been engaged in the project from that time to this point in time, whereby I've also been engaged in other activities during the project. Basically, in my research, I actually used participatory action research, where we took mobile screenings of the Paralympic broadcast from Tokyo 2020 Paralympics to Malawi and Lulo communities. And these broadcasts were actually translated into Chichewa, where they had commentary. When we went to the communities, there were a number of things that we actually found out, because it was an ethnographic research. There was pre and post data collection. So in the pre, found out that there was stigma that was deeply entrenched amongst the communities, whereby people viewed disability as inability, and in most cases, children who had disabilities were kept in their houses. In one particular case, which we faced in Chilanzulu, which is a southern part of Malawi, saw that there was a young man who was around mid-30s who died, but none of the community members knew about him. This really struck me, because I never expected that one's life can be erased just like that. So through the interviews, we found out there was just too much stigma, and people didn't really realize that people with disabilities have got that potential, have got that capacity to do things. After the screenings, there was actually a shift of events, because when they were asked, do you think people with disabilities can do sports? They were like, no, they can't. And some of them even said, these people just need help most of the times. For example, you go to fetch water, they need to be helped on how to do that. And in most cases, if they associate themselves with the public, they make mistakes. We've got examples of people who like fighting just because they have got disabilities. That was quite shocking. But later, when we presented the broadcast as well as theatre to these communities, the narrative started changing. And immediately we could see their reactions towards the screenings, because through the observations, we actually pictured some of the moments where people were very surprised. One key, to isolate two key examples, the paraswimmer as well as the para-archery athletes who were involved in the Tokyo 2020 Paralympics, were very key, and people were like, okay, this is very extreme, and we couldn't believe that these people can do this. So with that, people had to think that, through the interviews, they had to say that we know that now people with disabilities can do these things, because even the people that we have here who have got disabilities, their disabilities are not as extreme as what we've seen in the Paralympic broadcast. So we know that our children can also be able to do this. But apart from that, because the broadcast had commentary, which was in Chichewa, people were able to know exactly what the Paralympic broadcast were saying. And they could relate, because football is a very popular sport in Malawi and people listen to it. And the commentary was done by popular football commentators. So that brought in, it brought in this international event to a local situation, and then people could resonate. They were just part of the Paralympic broadcast, and they could say, oh, so it's this commentator who was saying this, and that made it more fun. There were moments that we could observe the audience laughing, not mainly because of the sports, but because of the commentary. It made it more lively and more important to the communities that we went to. The second part of it, we actually used the footage of a local athlete, Taonile Banda. That strengthened the community, because now we're showing these big para-athletes, probably from London, probably from America, Tokyo. It was quite challenging for them to actually say that, is this possible? But when we brought Taonile Banda, the narrative changed. They were like, okay, this is our local Malawian athlete, and she is not just local, she's someone who comes from Kasungu, in the rural areas. And people saw that it was possible. It wasn't a challenge anymore, because if it was done by someone from a local situation, it means that they could also do it. So both the commentary and the use of Taonile Banda, but also the use of theatre, community theatre, where performances were done in Chichewa, really allowed communities to actually see that this is possible. And towards the end, we noticed that through the interviews that were done later, people started saying that, I'm gonna let my child go back to school or do sports, because my child has this potential. You could even notice them isolating the examples of type of sports that their children have been able to do, but then they couldn't let them because they were afraid they were gonna get hurt. But apart from that, teachers now also pledged to say that we're gonna incorporate inclusive education into our system. Even without government doing anything, teachers said, we're gonna try and do this. We're gonna introduce, because we've got, for example, in Zimba, they mentioned that they've got a child who is very good with football, and they wanted to actually give him a chance to do some type of sports that was good for him. Apart from that, the last thing was community leaders also tried to give in their part by saying that we're going to continue doing this. We're going to bring in people. We're going to let them come and know about what has happened, because this is a very smaller audience. We're going to spread the news to the whole audience, and then probably try to create some rules that no family should be found keeping their child in their homes. Yeah, so for me, during this research, I have seen a community that was deeply entrenched into stigma, changing this perception just by seeing the Paralympics once. And later, throughout the whole processes, because there was a time I went back into those communities with similar research questions as a research assistant, and I could see that some of the things that these communities preached that they would do were actually being done, which was very inspiring. But apart from that, the government adopted some of the recommendations that were given through the studies that were done through PSAS. And it was very exciting, because some of the things that were mentioned in, for example, in my research about people being afraid of assistive technology, all these things were now being incorporated in different government policies. So yeah, that's it more about my research, as much as we can talk about localizing Paralympics.
How did Theatre for Development shape people's understanding of disability and inclusion?
One of my recommendations in my paper, because this research was done by two students, myself and my colleague, Vitumbiko Gwambaike, where he focused much on theatre. But in my recommendations, I said that we may need to corroborate both the broadcast, the screenings, as well as theatre in all the cases, because what theatre did was actually try to bring in the actual stories that were in the communities, starting with the actors that we worked with, the ones that were engaged in the creation of the theatre. They will actually talk about some of the disability stigma that they've witnessed throughout their whole lives. But apart from that, on the day of performance, there was actually more or less like a court to everyone who was available for that particular event. I will single out one case back in the center where we invited people from different backgrounds, including people with disabilities, and an issue to do with how people with disabilities are included in other things came up, and there was a debate. So it meant that what theatre did is actually give a platform for people with disabilities to bargain for something, to say we are not included. For example, in that debate, the debate was there is no one who represents us in your court as on a traditional authority level, which is a very higher level when we talk about ranks in terms of leadership in Malawi. So Theatre for Development gave different stakeholders a platform to talk about the issues that they had, but also it gave people the platform to talk about how they've experienced stigma, as well as what are their thoughts on disability. And beyond, there was like a consensus on how to move forward. So it meant that beyond it bringing in all these issues, right there and right then, people could sit down and discuss and then say, this is the solution. This is how we're going to fix this problem.
Looking ahead, how can media and community engagement work together to shift stigma?
The key thing with media is that immediately it creates awareness. Whether it's just listening, just the word parasports, so listening to it from the radio or TV or in a play, you're able to be aware that there is that word. This was a word that was completely unknown in Malawi, but through media, awareness was immediately actually created. And apart from that, it also even went beyond to actually create consequences in terms of people preparing for action, a plan to do some action. So I know that moving forward, media has that potential to actually eliminate stigma, because what people lack back, especially in Southern Africa, which is the global South, is information. The family that locks up their children have no idea on how to take care of the children. In my case, I've worked with people with disabilities for a very long time, especially parents with children with disabilities. Sometimes they actually have questions on how to balance between finding basic needs for their children and being able to take care of them. But if we allow media to actually help these parents to be aware, like having access to information, being able to actually have the capability to engage, to know where to get what type of information, how to do a lot of things, and if it's parasports, what are they supposed to do? If the media is able to give them that platform, it's going to help in eliminating stigma, because without information, people do things without any knowledge, and we cannot say they are in the wrong because they just don't know. So I know media has the power to actually help parents be aware, people be aware of the capabilities, the abilities of people with disabilities. And with that, moving forward, it means that people will make choices. We're giving them choices to actually still stigmatize them based on the knowledge that they have, or to know that these people have abilities and it is their right to be involved in different things.